Hi there, this is Neroke 5. Now, I don't usually do straight up MGTOW content very often, but this is one of those ones where it does come up. Now, I use Twitter primarily as a source to gather information, and every once in a while some post comes up that just kind of makes me stop and think, that's interesting. Now, what is really interesting about this one is that it was taking a biblical context and putting it into a modern term. And the thinking behind this, even though I don't necessarily agree with the rationality or Steve Jobs' observation on this, the irony of the photo in the tweet is not lost on me. Anyway, John Jevro, billions of women taking selfies with the image of an apple with a bite taken out of it, signifying Eve getting Adam thrown out of the Garden of Eden for her sins, and causing the suffering of mankind for eternity. Was Steve Jobs trying to remind us of the danger of women? Short answer on that for me is no. It's a coincidence. That being said, though, the dangers of women are fairly obvious. Now, I'm going to go through my very limited knowledge of the story of Adam and Eve, and I'm going to give you my personal take on this. Now, Adam and Eve were born without the knowledge of good and evil. They were living in a safe paradise, protected by God. They could eat as they like, eat from the animals, eat from the fruit, do whatever they want as long as they didn't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, here's the first problem with that. And we hit the first problem almost immediately. Now, if you don't want Adam and Eve to be eating from the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, why would you put the tree in such an easily accessible location? Why would you put it in such a way that that you could just walk up to it and take the low-hanging fruit? Okay, yes, Adam and Eve were innocents at this point. They didn't know any better. They completely trusted and believed in God. So, I guess from a certain point of view, there was no need to eat from the tree, to hide the tree, because Adam and Eve were just simply going to go along with whatever God told them to do, irregardless of what they knew, because they didn't see deception. They had no knowledge of good and evil. The concept of deception was not theirs to know about. Here's the second issue that comes up with this. God, all-knowing, all-seeing, allows Satan to come into the garden, talk to Eve, and convince Eve to eat the fruit. Now, that is a stupefyingly easy thing to do when Eve is unaware of deception. That is something that we need to keep in mind here. As MGTOW, yeah, it was Eve that committed the original sin. It was Eve that took the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. She did it again. I hear a lot of this from fundamentalist Christians. Oh, the devil made me do it. Well, no, you made you do it. But in the biblical situation, the devil literally convinced Eve that it was in her best interest to eat from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And she did. And she did, I suspect, because she had no reason to question or doubt or even suspect Satan's motives, because deception and dishonesty are, for most intents and purposes, evil acts, although they have been used for good purposes from time to time. So, Eve eats the fruit. She gains the knowledge. Now, at that moment, when you get a revealing or revelatory moment in your life, you generally want to share it with people. You if you care, and especially with somebody that you have formed a bond with, and let's face facts here, Adam and Eve had a bond. Eve believed, probably in her heart, that bringing Adam over and having him eat the fruit was going to be a good thing for him. Now, I'm not letting Eve off the hook. Eve could have stopped and thought, well, I violated, I don't have to take Adam with me, but I don't really think Eve thought things through, or she wanted to take Adam with her, because if she left on her own, if she had been kicked out on her own, I think she probably would have died, and humanity probably would have died. But then again, that's just me speculating, because I don't really believe in God, and I definitely don't believe in this story, at least not in a literal sense. But convinces Adam, drags him over to the tree, Adam eats the fruit. Now they both are in possession of the knowledge of good and evil. God gets pissed. God finds Adam and Eve, tosses them out of the Garden of Eden. Now, again, God, all-knowing, all-seeing, why did he allow Lucifer to come in? Why did he put the tree in such an easily accessible location where anybody could get to it? Now, I've got a video which I'm going to try to find on YouTube, which kind of makes fun of this point. Now, either, and this is how I'm going. This is just my personal take on it. God, in this particular situation, was a complete idiot, or humanity was supposed to leave the garden, which is why Lucifer was allowed in the first place. Now, the allegory, though, of the apple and the temptation is one that is specifically applied to women. Now, do I personally believe that Steve Jobs was trying to remind us of the dangers of women? On a scale of yes or no, I'm going to have to go with no. That's being said, though, and I think this does need to be said. The irony, like I said, the irony of what this means has not escaped me. Apple, I think Apple, the symbol that Steve Jobs picked for his company, was one of expanding knowledge. Hence the apple, hence the reason, knowledge of the tree of good and evil. But then again, I don't know the early history of the Apple company, so I really couldn't say for sure. Somebody wants to enlighten me, but that's kind of how I would see the apple. Knowledge of the power of good and evil. Knowledge in of itself does not make you a good person. Knowledge all by itself does not make you a powerful person. How you use that knowledge is. Now, the irony on this is that there are literally billions of I don't think there's billions, but there's millions of selfies out there. If there were billions of selfies out there with women with the photo, their iPhone up in the Apple symbol pointed at me, it wouldn't have taken me 3 hours to find the photos that you're looking at on this feed right now. Now, you gotta understand something though. This one, again, it takes quite a bit for any kind of a Christian to make me stop and think about an issue. But this does actually kind of, I really can honestly say that I will never again be looking at a selfie with a woman with an iPhone in the mirror and not think about that particular ironic image and that iconic image of the woman seducing the man with the apple, with their body, with their looks. That's why we as men need to be aware of our situation, of our biology, of our power to say no. You know, there's a lot there in a female package. And yeah, sex can be fun, but next time you see a woman taking a selfie with a photo and you see the Apple icon there, just kind of stop and just think about stop and consider the irony of that photo, of the initial seduction and the initial temptation that Eve tossed at Adam. And I'll go and say that Eve did not get Adam thrown out of the garden. They got thrown out together. Another way of looking at this is that the road to disaster was paved with good intentions, at least in Eve's case. But you know what? People are going to have different opinion on this. But yeah, for all the MGTOW guys out there, yeah, the Apple symbol on the selfie. Yeah, just stop and think about that. And this is coming from an atheist. Because again, I don't believe the story of creation. But, you know, it's definitely something to think about the next time you see this photo. A photo like this. Or the photos that you have seen. Anyway, this has gone on long enough. I have a maker support. Throw me some shekels. I could use it. Like, subscribe, and I will talk to you later.